G'day guys. This is a quick little video on hydration, antidiuretic hormones, and stuff like of that sort. Somebody actually asked me, well, Dean Paulson actually asked me a question, and I'll just share my screen and we'll go through it. So he basically said, Harry, bladder of steel Sopranos doesn't even take a rest room break. No, he doesn't. And I sort of replied in a humorous way, I'm a carny with upregulated antidiuretic hormones like those of tribal hunters. Hydrating on fat reduces urination. And it does actually. When you're actually hydrating on fat and you're not basically trying to force out of your body a whole lot of deuterium, yes, it does make a difference. Too much water, that is a problem. I mean, a bit, not a problem. We'll get into that shortly, why and why not, and those sort of factors. He asked me whether I had any links, and I said no, because I usually talk more about this. I do plan to make a comprehensive video on a lot of this sort of stuff down the track, probably mid-year, but it's, there are other priorities at the moment that are related to health that have got a bit more of a priority. So I'm more focused on those, but it is in the cards to be done, and which will look more comprehensively on water consumption and many other aspects of that in the future. Then the next comment that he makes, I would love to not have to take a leak 20 times per day, but I bought into this constant hydration BS. And look, unfortunately, a lot of people have done that. We've been conditioned over a very long period of time in our lives to think in those terms. So, that's a lot of us gone down that path. Look, don't get me wrong. I used to be one of those people that used to consume a horrendous amount of water on my kibble diet, on my high carbohydrate type diet in the past, and and high seed oil diet. And I never basically felt, I always felt I'm thirsty constantly. Now I don't have that thirst anymore. And the more I've shifted to the more I've got rid of plants, and the more I've shifted to the fat and tissue of animals, that has reduced. The only hydration that I get nowadays, which is a slightly reduced, the Evian water, which is an French alpine water that I use just for my coffees. That's about it. And even that I've sort of knocked back from 3 coffees to 2 coffees. So I'm not even hydrating. I'm not taking in as much of that sort of water in that regard. Anything that is sugary will dehydrate you. And that's usually because the body's trying to get rid of the deuterium. That's really what it is. A small amount, yes. Too much is not a good idea. And I think that's what then forces the body to try and get rid of this excess amount, is what happens. Anyway, my final sort of reply is, it's in the list of things to do. I talk about it in videos, and even Mary Ruddock mentions it in her experience with the tribe she went out hunting with, how she struggled to keep up with them in these arid regions, even though they weren't drinking any water while she was. And that was true. They had a whole lot of water with them, the camera crew and everyone, while these tribal people were just walking in an arid environment with no water whatsoever. And they even stopped, because they talked about water. They even stopped and they actually got a couple of them got a bit of hydration from actual leaves. Now, there is some in the morning that do actually consume a bit of, I can't remember, I think it may have been on one of the live streams she was on. Somebody actually asked her, I cannot remember for the life of me, but anyway, and she actually mentioned that there is a tribe that actually consumes early in the morning a bit of water and in the evening, but not throughout the day at all. So it's only a limited amount. which I found interesting. A lot of them, the other ones, when they do go out on their sort of hunt, like the San people of the Kalahari, the Bushmen, you know, they will occasionally get a bit here and there. And I sort of cover this in this reply, and I continued with that, said, our so-called science-based sports physiology is so wrong in so many ways. We know very little compared to these hunters, and we basically, you know, we know very little in comparison. It's most athletes are pretty much on the high kibble diets, dehydrating, and be constantly drinking water and all that. In some cases, if they're not getting enough sodium, there have been cases where people have died as a consequence. So it's very risky what we do nowadays, how we dehydrate ourselves with carbohydrates, and pretty much cause a lot of derangements to our electrolytes as well, with excessive amounts of water and lower deuterium to sort of manage and that sort of stuff. So it's pretty crazy what happens out there. I mean, I've heard of story people going up the Kokoda Trail, consuming so much water and not getting any sodium in, and pretty much dying. So yeah, very dangerous high consumption. We should hydrate with animal fats, and we should basically, with taurine, regulate those electrolytes and support the kidneys with taurine to properly recycle what is needed and what isn't excreted, which is how they are supposed to work efficiently when we give them the right nutrients and the right fuel sources. Anyway, moving on from there, I sort of go into sea level water dehydrates due to high deuterium levels, or sea level water, which I mean, you know, water in rivers and stuff like that. In the water of 155 parts per million, and it is that our bodies are trying to get rid of that high level of deuterium water, while ruminants drinking water from rivers use it as a growth factor for bacteria. That's a very interesting thing that I've come across from some Russian research. Because grass is low in deuterium, and grass is low in deuterium, you know, and I actually do say to him, look, I could be wrong about this, but the Russian research has shown a mechanistic link between heavy water, deuterium, and E. coli growth, but it's not only growth, but also protection of those cells. Now, the growth is my hypothesis, and I shouldn't have written it like that, but it shows certain protection in that regard. But it does, you know, protection assists with growth. So I'll get into that shortly. Plus, Mary noticed that they only use water from leaves that are low in deuterium if they are going to drink any water. And she did notice as they were walking. Lauren Cordain noticed the same with the Sand people, the Bushmen, using ostrich eggs to store water from leaves. I should correct that about the growth thing there. Yes, I do believe it, but that's a hypothesis part. Well, you'll know from this video. Yes, when you rush things, that's what happens, boys and girls. So this is the actual study. It's a Russian study that goes back ages, 1988, the effects of heavy water on the viability of bacteria. So how that influences their viability. Anyway, influence of heavy water. So deuterium 2O on the membrane, energization and the efflux of hydrogen ions, and the respiration of bacteria, E. coli, M17, which is a strain of E. coli, was studied. As has been shown, heavy water of a low concentration activates, and of high concentration above 10% inhibits the absorption of lipophilic cation, tetraphenophosphonemate, and of oxygen by cells. The return of these characteristics in the initial levels, so getting them back to the above after the removal of H2O, point to a reversible action of H2O. And then they point out a protective effect of H2O, which is heavy water, deuterium water, that's what heavy water is, towards membrane energization and the rate of respiration on dried cells. So was observed. So they observed this sort of, that it sort of seemed to be protective when the cells were dry. You know, and I'm going to myself, okay, this is interesting. You know, it got me thinking why, you know, when a human wakes up in the morning, you know, the bacteria are probably not getting any food, any hydration or whatever. Those bacteria are, in a sense, are slightly dehydrated. So they're in that sort of dried cell sort of state. So when you add deuterium, so when you drink a bit of water like some of those tribal people were doing, you know, you're probably basically, you know, it's, you know, and they say basically this fact is in agreement with the data of viability of bacteria. The indicated protective action increases at the stage of rehydration in the presence of H2O. So when you're actually rehydrating, which is basically would be the fat that you've actually consumed, or you may use from leaves or stuff like that or whatever, you know, it actually, this deuterium is actually acting as a bit of a protective thing. So it makes sense why these tribal people would be doing that to protect their bacteria in a sense, and why ruminant animals, before, you know, they'll consume some of this, you know, at the time or after, you know, they've been seen when, because they're constantly eating grass and they're sort of maintaining also that viability. And even early in the hours, early in the morning, they tend to basically consume a bit of water, and late in the evenings, you know, they're known to do this as well. That's when they're more susceptible to, you know, like if you're crossing a river and there's a crocodile in the dawn or dusk, you know, when things are not very clear, and it just goes for those animals. There's probably a good reason for it to maintain the viability of bacteria. So, you know, I've sort of thought, well, maybe, you know, that early coffee that I'm having, I'm breaking my fast, which has some deuterium, maybe, and it's rehydrating my bacteria. Maybe that is a good idea in a sense, as a protective sort of mechanism and all that. And I was aware of this, but I never really thought about it. And it's just that question, you know, got me thinking about it, because I was aware of this study, and I go, maybe a bit of water, we're not talking about a lot of water, maybe my spread, the way that I do it in the when I break my fast, I use a coffee, and then in the evenings, I usually have a glass of milk as well. And while a glass of milk isn't high deuterium, but it's not low deuterium as well. It does have a bit more deuterium than basically fat in comparison. And maybe that is a good thing for the viability, especially the morning stuff, when you've slept all night and you haven't had a lot of hydration of the actual, your intestine, and these little buggers are drying out a bit. And maybe that little extra deuterium is actually going to be playing a bit of a protective role for them. You know, I'm speculating here, pure speculation on my part in that regard, in terms of that. But obviously, I don't encourage people to drink shitloads of water based on that. But what I'm saying is maybe small amounts, like we've seen with some of these tribal people. Remember, one group, not all groups. So is it really that important? I don't know. It's one of those things that I've had a bit of a brain fart, and I know about this information, but there's a lot to be understood, a lot to be worked out. And I think it's going to take a long time and more research to really understand exactly what's actually happening and how we can modulate the gut better in that regard. So I'm still on the fence a bit on this sort of stuff when it comes to that sort of protective effect on bacteria. And I don't know whether it's all bacteria, whether it's just pathogenic bacteria, or whether it's all bacteria. I suspect that it seems from what they're saying, they've probably done other research, and they've done for this strain that they're calling a viability of bacteria in general. They may have done a bit more research in regards to that, but at the same, I'm still not 100% on some of this sort of stuff. But I thought it was a good idea to basically share this this information with you guys, because it is important that we think about it, we try things out and stuff like that. People may want to actually do a bit of a test or a bit of a like do this morning and night, dusk and type thing, and then do a gut microbiome thing before and after. If people are really into that sort of stuff, I don't know, and see whether it has any effect. I'd be interested to know. If you got I'm not going to go and spend money to do it, I'll just tell you. But if somebody else is interested to basically spend a bit of money, a dosh, and investigate it, be interesting. I hope somebody out there, younger people that are basically, because some of my subscribers are, doing biochemistry, doing certain research. I can think of one lady, Elizabeth, that maybe that would be an interesting area to look into and see whether there is some factor there. Does it affect all bacteria? Does it affect specific bacteria? Is there a benefit or maybe a downside? Because if there's a benefit, having a bit of water, like in a coffee or whatever, maybe a good idea to break your fast with that and then go on to food. Maybe it's not a good idea, but then again, we don't know. Maybe restricting may be a better idea. But then again, if you've got a balanced microbiome, we do know that some even pathogenic ones, like even Candida in small amounts, actually seems to have a benefit as well. Excessive amounts, it's a problem. It's like when it's Prevotella. Prevotella's in all of us. It's certain amounts, it's okay. It seems to have even some benefits. In excess amount, it seems to cause derangements and problems and too many inflammatory markers. So, which I've done a video before, and I've actually, it is in the playlist of the myths and falsehoods of veganism. You can actually go and check one of those videos. That covers this point. Yeah, but it's interesting in that regard. I thought, I'd share my sort of thinking, so you guys can see the way I reply and sort of my own thinking about these sort of things. That always I'm trying to go down different rabbit holes, trying to work out, how these work. There's a lot of things that we still do not know a lot about, and it's you've got to keep your mind. I mean, my core things are the N15 data, which is my foundation. I know we're super hyper carnivores, but there are other elements to that are still not clear. We've still not elucidated, scientifically speaking, a lot of these things. There are still, let's say, I want to say, there are still a lot of missing elements to the story. And so while looking at ancestral can give us a bit of a guide, these are ancestrals in interglacial periods. They're not ancestrals in glacial periods, which the majority of the period of humanity was spent. So that's another factor. So that's another confounder in a sense of historical adaptation. So there's a lot of questions, I know. Sometimes they're not always good answers or perfect answers. I think this area of physiology is still evolving. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know and a lot of stuff that we haven't researched, and what is the optimal amount of water and what isn't to be intaken, what is the optimal amount of hydration from fat and what isn't. all these are very hard questions. Other animals like when you talk about camels, they seem to basically do really well. And even though they've got a gut microbiome like any other species, tend to be on the very low deuterium end of the spectrum and seem to not show their age or anything. So, but I'm not saying we've got the same physiology. Just because they hydrate, all animals hydrate with fat. But at the end of the day, is there an optimal point for them and an optimal point for us? We haven't teased these things out properly. And that's the thing that, you can't extrapolate from another animal model. It's interesting, and it's interesting to see how, when people that have got cancer or stuff like that, when you actually put them on a diet, which is very low deuterium, more like the camel, they seem to get better and recover. Now that obviously because it's fixing up and reversing those cells back into a senescent state where they can actually use oxidative phosphorylation to produce their ATP energy. But at the same time, the question arises, where is that point, even for us and for other animals, but primarily for us, since we're interested in human health on this channel. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. See yous.